Welcome to Wayside's week of Easter devotions. My name is Brenda. Today we're going to look more closely at the story that we find in John 12, verses 1 through 8, and consider this thought: worship should be a lifestyle. As we begin in this passage, Jesus and his disciples are headed up to Jerusalem for the annual festival of Passover. They arrive in the town of Bethany, just 2 miles east of Jerusalem, at the home of Lazarus, one of Jesus' good friends. And if you recall, Lazarus has two sisters. Their names are Martha and Mary. As we begin to look at this passage, we see that Jesus is welcomed into their home and they prepare a supper, a feast for him and his disciples, as well as other guests that are in their home that evening. First, we see Martha was serving. Do you recall the sister spat from back in Luke chapter 10, when Martha was upset because Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus on an earlier visit and not helping her in the kitchen? Over time, Martha had grown to accept and to understand what her gifts were, those of service and hospitality. And a very simple statement on this visit: Martha was serving. Next, we see Lazarus was reclining at the table with Jesus. As the male figure in the home, Lazarus was the host for the dinner, and it was with a heart of gratitude that he welcomed Jesus into his home. You may recall that Lazarus had died earlier in the book of John, and Jesus had waited and had arrived in Bethany after Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Jesus stood outside his friend's tomb and he wept. And then he called forth, "Lazarus, come out." Truly, Lazarus was grateful for what the Lord had done in his life. And lastly, we meet their sister Mary. As the men were reclining at the table, eating dinner, Mary entered the room and she knelt down at the feet of Jesus. She anointed his feet with a pound of pure nard. We are told that this is a very costly perfume, as much as a year's worth of wages to have purchased this amount of perfume. Mary was most extravagant that evening as she anointed his feet, let down her hair, and wiped his feet with her hair. This was an act of true humility, as only servants would wash people's feet when they arrived in a home, as well as it was an act of her love, her devotion, and her reverence for the Lord. Mary was most extravagant. There was one attendee that evening that criticized Mary's actions and her worship of the Lord. Why has this perfume not been sold and the money given to the poor? But Jesus answers and says, "Let her alone, that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you always will have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Mary's act of worship at this dinner unknowingly anticipates the Lord's forthcoming burial. One brother and two sisters welcomed Jesus into their home. Their hearts were filled with love, devotion, and worship for their Lord. Mary was serving, Lazarus was grateful, and Mary was most extravagant. Worship should be a lifestyle. Our hearts should daily worship God in prayer, in service, and in praise. I pray that today you'll think about how your hearts could turn toward worship, and I wish you a happy Easter.